What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Let's Ask Paul, the podcast where I, Paul Abernathy, explain the National Electrical Code to you because somebody's got to do it, right? Thanks for joining me. If you have never listened to the podcast before, welcome. We're available on many different listening platforms, from iHeartRadio to Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Deezer, Spreaker, Spotify, so many ways to listen to our podcast. Again, you can also listen to all of them over on our YouTube channel. Believe it or not, it has caused my channel to get less views because, YouTube is more of a video type of platform, but I do share all of my podcasts over there. And I don't think that's real conducive for YouTube. They don't like that. But I don't care. I use it to keep track of everything. I'm not about the clicks. I don't care about the subscriptions and number of subscribers. That stuff never bothered me because my topic is very niche-y anyway, right? It's code. Once you learn it, people think they know it, then they move on. It's not like you're listening to me talk about other things other than electrical code. So anyway, so I get it. But it's a good place for me to store my content. So that's what I use YouTube for. So if you want to watch some videos, you can check it out. If you want to listen to some podcasts using this simple YouTube app on your phone, we also put our podcasts over on YouTube as well. So again, cross-platform listening opportunity, all available. And of course, if you have any questions you want to submit to me, please do so at paulabernathy.com. It's a simple portal. All you got to do is put in your information, put in your email address, and put in your question. And I will respond back to you either via email, if that's a convenient way for me to answer a very quick question, or if I think it can benefit others, I will turn it into a podcast, much like the one that you're listening to right here. Now, we're continuing on with a series that we're doing where we're looking at questions that were actually submitted to NECA. And we're not looking at their answers. We're looking at our answers, or because I tend to go a lot deeper than the answers that are given from NECA. But I like to do with this segment, I like to give you the date so that you can go search the archive and you can read their answer if you want. But really, it's so you can see the question. So I'm giving all credit to the question from the individuals that submit it to NECA. And it's through that question of the day platform. So these are just questions. But a lot of times, and this came to me as a request from somebody, said, Paul, why don't you start doing this? And I'm like, that's pretty cool. So I'll intermix these with my Let's Ask Paul segments. And so I can kind of give you some questions out there that maybe you've run into and you need the answers for. And sometimes they're really good. Now, I tend to go in a lot more detail than what's given because, again, typeset, it's small. They can only give you so much info. They don't want to go too deep. You get lost in it. Well, when I do it on a podcast, I can just elaborate, baby. So that's why we do it. All right, so let's go on and get into today's question. The question is, it says, thank you for your thoughtful and insightful service you provide to the industry. Yes, I do think question of the day with NECA. Thank you for making that available to so many people. And this started with Charlie Trout many years ago. Charlie's no longer with us. He's passed away, but they keep this service going. So I think it's great. It's kind of like my Let's Ask Paul. I like to answer questions. And so this is kind of the same concept, but they're really good questions. And I think it's going to help bring some additional discussions here on the podcast. So let me read it. It says, my question pertains to 250.32b and the conductor between the equipment grounding conductor EGC run with the supply conductors and the grounding electrode. Okay, so what he or she is talking about is you've got your house, let's say, and you got a separate building, and you're running a feeder to that separate building. And of course, you're going to run two hots, a neutral, and an equipment ground, right? That's what it tells you to do in 250.32. So that's what we're doing, right? 250.32b. So 4 conductors out there. Got it? Okay. It says a separate building is supplied by a feeder and has a single building disconnect. Yes, so it has the disconnect requirements that we would see in the National Electrical Code. In this case, since it's an outside feeder that's running to that building, then you've got the rules that you're going to meet in Article 225, right? So we're all on the same page with that. Everything looks good. The disconnect requirements that you're going to have over there is in 225.31. We're all good. We've got it. Pretty clear. Now it says the grounding electrode at this detached structure, it says the grounding electrode is a concrete encased electrode with rebar stubbed up. Is the conductor from the equipment grounding bus in the disconnect to the grounding electrode, the EGC as stated in the citation. I guess somebody failed a job for this or something. And sized according to 250.122, or is the conductor considered a grounding electrode conductor and running from the grounding electrode to the equipment grounding bus sized according to 260.66? Thank you, and the person's name is Claudia. So I guess it's a woman here, unless a guy's named Claudia, and I'm be like, I guess you know what, you can identify whatever you want, but I'm going to assume a Claudia is a female Claudia. Okay. All right. So this is important. So it's not 260.66. You're talking about the grounding electrodes. That's 250.66, right? All right. So that's really what we're talking about, the grounding electrode conductor, 250.66, whereas the electrodes are 250.52, and you get a list of them, right? So we're really talking about the grounding electrode conductor from the equipment ground bus in the service the feeder disconnect at the actual detached structure, right? And the electrode. So that is a grounding electrode conductor. Now, the equipment ground, it's run from the first dwelling, let's say, to the detached structure. That equipment grounding conductor is based on 250.122, based on the overcurrent device that's supplying the detached structure, okay, that's protecting those feeders. So that would be sized based on that. Once you get to the detached structure now, you're going to have your separation, right? You're going to have your neutral bar that's separated, isolated, and your equipment ground bus that's connected to the can or the case. And then from that, you're going to go from that equipment ground terminal bus to your grounding electrodes. In this case, it was a concrete encased electrode at that detached structure. Now, you're going to size that grounding electrode conductor that's running down to it, right? You're going to be sizing that based on 250.66, right? And so what we want to do is go look and see what 250.66 says, okay? Because that's what you're sizing. All right, 250.66, size of the alternating current grounding electrode conductor. It says the size of the grounding electrode conductor in the service at each building or structure where supplied by a feeder or branch circuit or as a separately derived system of a grounded and ungrounded AC system shall not be less than given in table 250.66 except as permitted in 250.66 A through C. Okay, so you have some permissive allowances in A through C. Okay, so in this case, it's talking about the ungrounded conductors that are supplying it. In this case, it really, I don't think the sizes of anything were given. And I don't think it even gave the service size or anything like that. Okay, so I don't think any of that was actually given to us. But let's just assume it was, okay? Let's assume that it was 200 amps in a detached structure, and let's just say that it's 200 amps and it was 3/0 copper, okay? So if that was the case, you'd come down here and you look and you'll see that 3/0 copper requires a 4-gauge grounding electrode conductor, okay? And we're looking at table 250.66, so it would be a 4-gauge, okay? And of course, you run that down to the concrete encased electrode. Now, mind you, that you do also have the allowances in 250.66B for concrete encased electrode, which says here, if that's the only electrode and that's all that was expressed here, then it would not be required to be larger than a 4. Well, based on the 3/0 copper, it already is going to be a 4 based on table 250.66. But here, it doesn't have to be larger than a 4 based also on 250.66B. Now, the reason I say it that way is because for whatever reason, it was a larger conductors coming out. Let's say it was 2 sets of 500 kc mil, just for craps and giggles, right? So if that's what was supplying this building, then you go down here and you'll notice that it says in table 250.66, It says size of the largest ungrounded conductor or equivalent area for parallel. So again, if we're running two sets of 500, then 500 and 500 is 1,000. So that is your area, okay? So it's 1,000 kc mil, right? So if that's the case, then we look down and we go, okay, well, if it's, let's see here, copper, it's over 600 through 1,100, then it says it would be a 2-aught copper grounding electroconductor. But since it's running to a concrete encased electrode, and that is it, it's not, there's no mention of it going anywhere beyond that, then you can use 250.66b. And that would say it's not required to be larger than a 4. So it doesn't matter the size of these conductors that are parallel. It's two 500 kc mils, okay? So it might be 1,000 kc mil, right? But at the end of the day, what? At the end of the day, it says here that it would be a 2-aught, but 250.66b says it doesn't have to be larger than a 4. So you could still just run a 4 out to it. So again, it doesn't matter as long as it's not going from that concrete encased electrode to another electrode that would require a larger grounding electroconductor, right? So when that's the case, you're just running it to, in this case, the question was just running it to rebar, concrete encased electrode, providing it qualifies as one as such, okay? Then that would be it. Then you'd be done. Okay. Now, if it had been smaller than a 4, based on, again, the size of the conductors that are supplying it, if it had been smaller than a 4, then you could have used the smaller based on table 250.66 if it ended up being smaller than a 4. But as I said on a previous episode of this, you got to be careful. Okay? If it's an 8 gauge, for example, which is permitted, let's say it was an 8 gauge, it was all that would be required based on the size of the ungrounded conductors, then you're going to have to protect it in a raceway. If it was a 6 gauge, if it wasn't subject to physical damage, then you're okay to run that along the building surface. If it is subject to physical damage, and that is all subjective to your AHJ or whoever's there, it may be obvious, then it would have to be in a raceway anyway. So all those things are so important. We do have another, actually that would be, if you're interested in that topic, you want to go listen to episode 83 of Let's Ask Paul. And that one kind of talks about that in a little more detail. Okay. All right. So we answered that question. I'm sure I went into it in way more detail than they did. This is so important also to understand terminologies. Again, the equipment grounded conductor is what's coming from the dwelling to the detached structure. That's sized based on whatever the overcurrent device is that's ahead of that circuit. And once you get to the detached structure, you've got what's called a grounding electroconductor from the equipment terminal bus down to the electrode. It doesn't connect to the neutral. Those are separated there, right? Separation. Okay. Then you want to go from the equipment ground bus down to the grounding electrode. That is a grounding electroconductor, and that is based on the size of the conductors that are supplying that remote distribution panel or at that separate building. You with me? A separate structure. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. And yes, the other question that people ask, do you have to have a grounding electrode system at that building? Yes, that's where you would be at 250.32a, and it would explain that you have to have that. And if you've got your code books, you can go look at it, and it's pretty neat because that talks about the grounding electrode in A, and of course B is talking about when you supply a branch or feeder to a building that you have to, when you have a grounded system, this tells you what you got to have, and that's why you get the 4 conductors. You with me? Sweet. We covered that one. Until next time, folks, stay safe. God bless. And hopefully you got something out of that episode. A short one, but again, great question that was submitted to NECA. And hopefully we went into a little more detail. Till next time, stay safe. God bless.